Well, here's a video topic no one asked for. Ezekiel's temple from the Bible, but built in Minecraft. Well, welcome everyone to my new series that I'm going to be calling Luthercraft because honestly that is a fantastic name. And I'm going to be just documenting me building the Temple of Ezekiel in Minecraft as you see here, and just talking about theology as we go along the way. I'm doing this because I built Solomon's Temple actually recently in a recent video. You can check that video out. And that got a lot of positive comments on it. And I want to release a world download, but I'm just not really able to at the moment. So I thought I'd kind of do what is, in my opinion, the next best thing, and do sort of a build through of the next big project I want to work on, and that is Ezekiel's Temple. So this is the gosh, which gate is it? It is the East Gate. Sorry, I need to use my Minecraft directions. This is the East Gate. There's going to be a gate over there, and there's going to be a gate over there. And as you can see, it's big. Let's go up on this gas and just show you just how big this thing is. It is big. It is a whole lot bigger than Solomon's Temple, as you can see, which makes it all the more fun. And the proportions are as close to biblically accurate as I can get in Minecraft, which I'll explain more in a minute. So if you don't know what Ezekiel's temple is, here's a quick overview. So the prophet Ezekiel was a biblical prophet who lived during the time of the deportation to Babylon, which was a period of time when God basically got fed up with Israel and Judah and sent Babylon in to kick their butts, and a bunch of people were carried away to Babylon to become slaves again. And during this time, there was a bunch of prophets prophesying, both written and spoken. And one of these guys was Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, oh no, don't go away from me. Ezekiel is the, stop it, come back to me, thank you. Ezekiel is the author of the book of Ezekiel, which is a pretty long book. And it is a wild book because it talks about not only, you know, stuff that he wrote, but also stuff that he did, and it's pretty crazy. But one of the craziest parts is towards the end of the book, there's this big elongated section about a vision he sees of this temple. And what's really funny is that the first time he sees it, he doesn't describe it as a temple, actually. He describes it as looking like a city, like a small city. He's like, I saw what looked to me like a city. As you can see from the floor plan, yeah, it's basically as big as a small city, way bigger than the footprint of Solomon's Temple, and if it was to be built in Jerusalem today, it would be absolutely massive. And basically the way the vision goes is that he's given a tour of this temple by this angel, and the angel has this big measuring rod in his hand, and he goes around and he just like holds the measuring rod up to all these places to show Ezekiel how big everything is. Now the length of the rod is given in like cubits, and so basically I've had to go in and translate cubits to meters, because in Minecraft one block is supposed to be about a meter by a meter, and so it's not going to be perfect. But these outer walls are basically about 3 meters tall and 3 meters deep, and I made it a little bit more like inset and decorated because I don't. Yeah, it's Minecraft, and I have to take a little bit of liberties, which is kind of like a side note. It's kind of always bothered me about a lot of replications of biblical buildings, like how much liberty people take with stuff. But having built a lot of them myself now, I realize like you really do have to take a lot of liberties, because there's just so much stuff they don't tell you about what things look like. You know, the colors and the shapes, and like the window slits, which we know, you know, Ezekiel described being there. But, you know, I'm going to add like a pretty big window here, but he didn't say there was one, he didn't say there wasn't one, so I just kind of had to make it up a little bit. But the proportions are pretty close to what they actually are, and you can see just how kind of like awkward and disproportionate it is. Like, this is the outer wall. It's like, you know, a human and a half tall, whereas that's just the gate. Like, that's how big the gate is compared to that. I think the amount of like sort of disproportion that we have in the temple kind of lends itself to how we should interpret it, which is kind of segues into interpretation. There's kind of three main ways people interpret Ezekiel's vision. The first way is to say that Ezekiel's vision, he is seeing a vision of the future, that basically people are, at some point in the future, Israel is going to construct this temple literally in Jerusalem, and that's going to be sort of the beginning of a new and final era in Israel's history, where everyone's going to have super long lives and everything's going to be great. And so that's kind of the first view. The second view is a purely symbolic view. And that says that what Ezekiel's looking at is not a literal temple. All of the proportions are supposed to have a deeper spiritual meaning. And that's what we should be primarily taking out of the text, is sort of the spiritual meaning of just how methodical and thought out everything is. And then the final theory is the eschatological theory. And this says that Ezekiel is basically, he's looking at New Jerusalem. So when the book of Revelation talks about New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, Ezekiel's basically seeing that. He's seeing heaven, and he's seeing the heavenly temple, and the heavenly temple will descend out of Jerusalem from on high, and that will be the end times, basically. And so that's kind of the three main positions. Now, I'm going to be totally honest. I'm not 100% sure where I land on all of that. Maybe part of this series will kind of be my self-discovery of what I think about all of that. But where Ezekiel's temple sort of falls in the history of temples in Israel's history, I think is quite fascinating, because there have been quite a few temples throughout the Bible. And the first temple, I would actually argue, is actually the Garden of Eden. I would argue that the Garden of Eden is set up in a temple-like fashion, and it's basically God. The first time God actually enters into his creation and actually walks with people, and has this relationship with people that just doesn't happen in the creation story. And it also is set up in this sort of threefold manner, which all temples are built to replicate afterwards, and a lot of temples are built with like sort of garden imagery from then on, calling back to Eden. So I think calling Eden sort of the first temple, I think, is really appropriate. And so that would be like the first temple in the Bible. And the second temple in the Bible isn't a temple at all. It's the tabernacle, and it's basically a Egyptian style war tent, that they kept the Ark of the Covenant in, that was made by Moses. It was commanded by God to be made. And that remained in play for a long time, until the reign of King Solomon, where he built a new temple, and it was a very extravagant temple, and that lasted until the deportation to Babylon. When the deportation to Babylon took place, Babylon basically destroyed the temple and took all the gold with it, or whatever gold was left in it, because the kings had really mismanaged funds. It's like really hilarious. You go through just like every time something remotely bad happens to Israel or Judah, the kings are like, well, time to sell more stuff from the temple to other nations. It's so bad. But after about 70 years, they return and they lay the foundation for a new temple. But they don't have the funds or manpower to build anything nearly as impressive as Solomon's temple, so they build a pretty small and wimpy temple. And what's really interesting about that temple is that, unlike the tabernacle and Solomon's temple, the Bible does not say that the Holy Spirit descended on that temple. Doesn't happen. And both Jewish and Christian traditions maintain that the Spirit of God did not descend on the second temple in the same way that it had before, which is really fascinating. And then that temple kind of remains in effect for about 400 years, and then under just before the birth of Christ, a sort of local king called Herod, one of the Herods, I don't remember which one, did like this massive renovation project to the temple to kind of like win over the Jewish people a little bit. And that newly renovated temple is referred to as Herod's temple. And that came not only with, revamped temple stuff, but it also came with its own like temple currency, and it was a whole ordeal. And then 70 years later-ish, another really catastrophic thing happens, and the Romans basically get tired of the Jews, and they come in and they destroy Israel, and they destroy the temple, and it's gone. To this day, there's no temple. It's been 2,000 years. There's no temple. No physical temple, that is. So that's kind of the history of temples. And that's kind of why people are wondering, like, where does Ezekiel's temple fit into this? Because it's talked about during the deportation to Babylon, but when they return, they don't build Ezekiel's temple. That doesn't happen. So where does Ezekiel's temple fit into the temple story is just kind of like the big question. And like I said, I'm not 100% decided what I think about that, but there are some things that I am sure on, and the thing that I'm most sure on when it comes to biblical temples, especially nowadays, is that Jesus Christ is the temple. He is the temple that was broken down and raised up 3 days later. Now, why do I think this? Well, because Jesus literally said that. Jesus literally said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And then the parenthetical note is, he was referring to his body. So, Jesus calls himself, his body rather, a temple. God didn't leave his people without a temple. He provided them with a temple to outlast the physical temple that was destroyed by the Romans, and that was his son, Jesus Christ. And that's kind of the most important thing, I think. And then, in addition to Jesus Christ being the temple, he also invites other people to join him and become part of a spiritual temple. So this is why Jesus Christ calls himself the cornerstone. He's the cornerstone of a living temple built with living stones. And the epistles also talk about this, that we become living stones, a part of a spiritual temple, by faith, Christ being the chief cornerstone. And this actually gets expanded upon in the book of Revelation, because Jesus says to some of the churches, like, to those who conquer, in the midst of persecution, they will be pillars in the temple of my God. It's like, well, temples have stones and they have pillars, and so it's like, to those who conquer, you're not just a stone, you're a pillar. You're an important stone. Now, of course, there's a whole discussion about being a pillar and not being haughty or arrogant about that, and that's something that St. Paul talks about in Galatians. He's like, whether you're a pillar or not, it means nothing to me. God shows no partiality. So there's an arrogance to, I want to be a pillar, that we don't want. But Jesus does talk about being a pillar, and so that's really cool. So you have living stones in this temple, and every believer is a living stone in this temple. And some people are pillars in this temple, and others are foundation stones. And so the chief foundation stone is, of course, the cornerstone, which was the first stone that they would lay down. And then you also have other foundation stones. And this is what's talked about in the book of Hebrews, where it says that the church is built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. Again, talking about this sort of temple imagery, it's like the apostles and the prophets, they're sort of like the living stones that go at the bottom, that form the foundation and basis of the Christian faith, and then everyone else is on top of that. But Christ is the cornerstone of it all. And the important question is, of course, what does it mean for the apostles and prophets to be the foundation upon which the church is built? Does it mean that we're literally standing on top of their heads? No, of course not. Does it mean that, there is, as the Mormons would say, like there's 12 apostles, Jesus appoints 12 apostles, and there needs to be 12 living apostles today. There needs to be like a living office for each of the 12 apostles. It's like, well, no, that's ridiculous. Like, you don't need to have an ongoing office of the apostles. You don't have to have like a modern day office of Jeremiah or Jonah or Thomas or John in order for the church to be built on these people. What it means to be built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets is to be built on their faith, on their confession, and on their words. And this is why we don't have any problem when Jesus, calls Peter the rock and says, on this rock I will build my church. It's like, yeah, because the church is built on all the apostles and prophets, namely on their confession, which is why Jesus calls him the rock right after he confesses that Jesus is the Christ. Right. So the church is built on Peter, And it's also built on all the other apostles and prophets, but not in the sense where we need a modern day seat of Peter or a modern day office of Peter, but in the sense it's built on Peter's confession, on his words. And that's kind of controversial, but it's kind of the only one that lines up with all the biblical passages about temples and living stones and all of that jazz, which is really cool. So anyway, if you're interested in this series, go ahead and do the YouTube things, like and subscribe, and give me your comments. If you think I could be building something better, or if you have any suggestions for what I could do differently, just let me know. And as the moon rises in the background, I am going to say, have a good day, and God bless. Bye-bye.